We attended night school after we were married to be prepared to take better paying jobs, knowing that art was not going to pay the bills. My first memory of soft abuse, which I guess is intimidation, was we were married in September, which left me 3 months to save money and really surprise him with a few nice Christmas gifts. I put aside some money from my paycheck, and when it was close to Christmas, I purchased, now some of you won't have no idea what these things are, a portable battery-powered tape recorder for him to take to class, and a smoking jacket, mind you, that was much nicer to wear than the bathroom which he wore over his other clothes in the apartment because the rooms were cold and the landlady controlled the heat. The third gift was the first electric shaver for him. I was very pleased with my semi-expensive gifts, and I bought and prettily wrapped. On Christmas morning, as I sat on the floor smiling and bouncing ever so slightly with excitement, he opened the gifts. Instead of being pleased, he softly abused me by saying, "Where did you get the money for these things?" What could I say? I told him I saved the money from my pay. I had not anticipated for being in trouble for buying thoughtful and useful gifts for my new husband, but I was. The soft abuse went like this: "How dare you hide money from me? So this is how it's going to go, is it? You hiding money from your husband. I'll return everything to the store tomorrow." And he did. Within the month, he decided he really could use a small tape recorder for class, and he thought the electric shaver was a pretty good idea. He went out and replaced them both. I really don't know what he ever did about the smoking jacket or anything to replace that. Years later, I had a decent non-art job, and I quit work to produce 3 children in 5 years. The husband had a job too, but not very well paying. This could be a much longer story, but I'll get down to the few specific episodes. Having my first baby was the first time I was ever a hospital patient. It occurred to me that I could be a nurse. At the time, due to the national nursing shortage, the college was encouraging nursing as a career for mature women to return to the workforce. Nursing seemed like a job I was pretty sure I could do, and I would enjoy doing it, so off to night classes I went. The husband, that's in caps. It's like saying the dragon, you know. He knew I would need him to hurry home on Thursday nights as early as possible because I had to leave the house at 5 o'clock sharp to get to class on time. I was hoping he would step up to care for his children, but he said he couldn't be home until much later on school nights. I hired a neighbor's daughter to stay with the kids until he got home. Incidentally, I afforded the babysitter by doing some freelance artwork. He was either jealous or annoyed that I was earning money by drawing and painting, so he ultimately softly abused me by charging me for the electricity that I used for the lights after he went to bed. Several months later, when I was well ensconced in the night school, and he and I had our first appointment with a social worker who was going to save our marriage. Our appointment was for 6 o'clock, let's say on a Wednesday night. I remembered that he couldn't get home by 6 in the evening, so I said, "Oh, I guess I'll have to change that appointment to 7 because you can't get home at 6. He softly abused me by saying, "Oh, I can get home by 6. I just wanted to make it hard for you to go to college, so I walked around to kill time." Yeah, I sat in the tub and sobbed that night. I'm not much of a crier unless it's a Lassie movie, but boy, that did it. Despite the poor neighborhood, I managed to have a very nice collection of friends. One of the lady friends who had kids about the same ages of mine happened to be a college instructor. Her husband was a professor. My husband softly abused me by saying, "What do those people want to be bothered with you anyway? You have no education." I have to admit that the usual insecure woman who was raised in my generation, so I apologized. I said, "I don't know, but we have a good time and all the kids have a good time. We all get along." I continued with my friends, but have remembered the belittling remark for 40 years. He reminded me, "If you go to college, before you know it, you'll be leaving me." he was right. But things were not all bad. Those were the days when he gave me 50 cents a week for my allowance. I was permitted to spend it any way I wanted. I don't know if anyone from the younger generation knows what it means to turn a collar. Turning a collar, this is depression. I mean, I didn't come from the depression, but I learned about it. Turning a collar is what a wife did to make the husband's business shirt look new again. This is going to be your lesson. You can talk about this at your next cocktail party. I'd remove the tiny stitches that held the collar in place, then turn it over and sew the underside to show outwards. I hated to sew, still do, but I did the collar and the cuff turning because we were poor. Once after returning his repaired shirt to him, he said, "This will never hold up," and he softly abused me by pulling the stitches out with his fingers. I did assert myself for once and boldly refused to do any more sewing for him ever. Once while singing a hymn with the congregation in church, he softly abused, "You look just like my mother when you sing, including how you move and hold your hand and how you fix your hair." Well, I liked my mother-in-law, but I knew it was meant to be insulting, so I went straight home and cut my hair. Luckily, my hair was thick and forgiving, and it resisted any problems. It grew back quickly. Now, an example of his intimidation of my being spineless, I must take credit for that. One time he said, "Just look at your short hair, and look at all your girlfriends. You're probably a lesbian." Well, I should have known if I was a lesbian or not, but I thought, wow, maybe I'm a lesbian. I have short hair and a lot of girlfriends. But I concluded that despite my short hair and that I wasn't that happily married to him, I was not a lesbian. In retelling these stories, I realized I was a wimp. But in those days, almost 50 years ago, and I am the first one to admit I cannot believe that I was an adult 50 years ago, but women were not as likely to stand up for themselves in those days. I certainly never saw anything but acquiescence from my mother. She had a nice husband as far as I know, but I was a kid, so I don't know. But somewhere along the way, my emotional chutzpah and my muscle came to me in bits and pieces. The end of the story is that I left him, got the court order of protection, I got welfare. No one loved welfare more than I did. I loved welfare. I had so much more money on welfare than I ever had while being married. And without the husband, I had no one to pull back when the kids and I were going forward. I had Medicaid, which means I could finally afford to treat the kids' sore throats. I had food stamps for a family of 4, which was such great wealth, I immediately put on 40 pounds. Those were victory pounds. Those were victory pounds. I bought a jar of pickles. My landlord was painting the bathroom, and I said to him, "Hey, Bill, would you open this for me?" And we stood in the bathroom, and we had pickles. I had food stamps. Oh, my gosh. Okay, we also used the Fresh Air Fund, where I sent the bigger kids off to Massachusetts and New York for 2 weeks in the summer, a couple years in a row. So I finished school and got a great job at Rikers Island, which so impressed me. This is an advertisement. I took notes to later write my first novel about women in prison. Incidentally, in my novel about women in prison, I know you know all novels say these characters are all fiction, but I called Yvonne and I said, "I'm writing a story about a woman who comes into the prison ministry. May I use your name?" And I let her read it, and she said, "Oh, sure." So she's in my book, and I didn't bother to change her name because I wanted to honor the work that she did. Amen. So I went on to get my master's degree. As a nurse practitioner, I was the first one in the world, and maybe still the only graduate of the correctional nurse program. Luckily, I experienced minimal physical abuse, and I knew it would have taken me just as long to leave a physically abusive person. But I finally figured it out. I was no longer to be intimidated, and I was strong and had the power to change my and my children's destinies. I finally did it. That's all.